Hello, everyone. My name is Bryce Budney, and this is my presentation for my thesis paper, and it is entitled The Rise of Antisemitism in the United States. Alrighty, so we'll start off with my introduction here. So, obviously, anti-Semitism has been one of the most persistent forms of discrimination throughout history, and especially following World War II and the events of the Holocaust, which is considered the modern height of prejudice against the Jewish people. Public awareness for these kinds of things increased substantially. Things like the civil rights movement as well as the more modern advents of multiculturalism and diversity, have fostered a period in America that is widely viewed as one of the most tolerant periods in history for the Jewish people. However, much more recent political shifts have given rise to the ideas of anti Zionism as well as the much more serious anti Semitism. And this has occurred on both sides of the political spectrum, and its resurgence has kind of become a prevalent social and political issue facing our nation today. And this is kind of evident in the concerns that Jewish communities show, um, especially organizations such as the Anti Defamation League, the ADL, and the Southern Poverty Law Center, which are focused on minority rights and protecting those rights. So, as anti Zionism grows with the current political climate, so too does misinformation and fear mongering around topics that relate to the Jewish people. And that's the kind of thing that can lead down the path to anti Semitic thought, to anti Semitism itself, and even like anti Semitic actions, anti Semitic incidents. And, this political atmosphere, um, it's created a number of blatantly anti Semitic political movements. It's fostered a lot of online hate speech towards Jewish people. And this study kind of seeks to analyze whether hate speech online and major geopolitical events relating to the Jewish people are associated with increases in anti Semitic incidents. Alrighty, so getting into the actual research here, historically, many scholars prior to October 7th, 2023, and the war in Gaza thought that anti Semitic political speech and movements were a thing of the past. Flare ups and fringe extremists might persist, but the overall political atmosphere had turned seemingly insurmountably in favor of the Jewish people and Zionism. So, in that context, theorists were examining historical anti Semitism and its causes, leading to a variety of conclusions about the different anti Semitic beliefs of different cultures and how they were formed. In particular, scholars noted that hostility toward Jewish communities has historically taken religious, racial, and political forms, allowing it to kind of survive even when one justification from one culture declines. In regard to America in particular, Israel was for decades seen as our closest ally in the Middle East, fiercely supported by both Democrat and Republican presidents from Lyndon Baines Johnson to Barack Obama. However, more recently, the national populist messaging of President Trump, despite his vehement support of Israel, has inadvertently created a faction of the right wing that is staunchly anti Zionist and largely anti Semitic. This group exists mostly online, but events such as the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville in 2017 display the rising tension between these far right extremists and Zionists, as well as the Jewish people. On the left wing, in reaction to the unfolding events of the war in Gaza and the 2026 Iran war, a wave of anti colonialism targeted at Israel has surged on the left wing. This has led to some anti Semitism from left wing sources, mostly based on the false generalization that all Jewish people, even left wing Jews, support Israel. However, anti Semitism has gained much more traction on the far right, where online anti Semitic movements have garnered a lot of attention and increasingly large followings. Scholars who have witnessed this rise of anti-Semitism, they're very clear on a distinction between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. They are entirely distinct concepts. but they can often stem from similar ideological bases. They can come from similar places. Anti Zionism is a political movement that separates the Jewish people from the state of Israel, and in particular, the secular right wing government of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Their criticisms of the Israeli state, which many anti Zionists on the left wing would characterize as a colonial state operating within indigenous Palestinian land, they do not meet the definition of anti Semitism on their face. And many Jewish people in Israel and America would likely agree with these sentiments. In addition, the prevalence of this online extremism has prompted its study, and the results strongly support ideas such as media effects theory, which holds that media exposure can shape attitudes and perceptions. Um, Another idea supported by the literature is conflict spillover theory, which holds that international conflicts can have political and social consequences for other countries. The combination of these two theories may provide an excellent background for the relationship between anti Semitic incidents, geopolitical events, and anti Semitic discourse online. Alrighty, so on to my research question, which is are increases in anti Semitic hate speech online or major geopolitical events associated with increases in anti Semitic incidents? My research objectives are going to be to analyze the relationship between anti Semitic hate speech online and anti Semitic incidents in the United States over time, to examine the role of geopolitical events as catalysts for an increase in anti Semitic incidents, and to measure the effects that online hate speech and geopolitical events have on anti Semitism. My hypotheses that I've come up with based on these research objectives and my research question are, if there is an annual increase in anti Semitic activity online, then the annual number of anti Semitic incidents in the United States will also increase. And if there is an ongoing geopolitical event involving Israel or the Jewish people during a given year, then the annual number of anti Semitic incidents in the United States will increase. As for my methodology, this study uses a linear time series regression analysis to examine the relationship between anti Semitic hate speech online, geopolitical events, and anti Semitic incidents in the United States during the years 2015 to 2024. In order to measure these anti Semitic incidents, this study is going to use the annual data compiled by the Anti Defamation League. The ADL's yearly audit of anti Semitic incidents is described as a composition of both criminal and non criminal incidents of harassment, vandalism, or assault against individuals and groups reported to the ADL by victims, law enforcement, the media, and partner organizations. This data set is then going to serve as a widely cited measure of these anti Semitic incidents. While it does acknowledge that it doesn't attempt to catalog every expression of anti Semitism, they also updated their own methodology after the events of October 7th in order to separate general criticism of Israel from anti Semitism. Linear regression was specifically selected because the yearly number of anti Semitic incidents is a continuous variable. And this method is going to allow the study to compare how changes in our independent variables relate to these incident levels over time. The dependent variable in this study is obviously going to be the annual number of anti Semitic incidents taking place in the United States, while the independent variables are going to be anti Semitic activity online, as measured by the study's online hate index, and a binary variable indicating ongoing geopolitical events. The data organization and regression analyses were conducted in Microsoft Excel, including the analysis toolpack regression model. Anti-Semitic activity online is going to be measured using data from Google Trends relating to anti-Semitic topics. Google Trends measures search engine data for each search, each keyword, on a scale from 0 to 100. relative to other searches on the platform. This data was then aggregated into what this study will refer to as an online hate index for each year, which is then compared to the yearly number of anti Semitic incidents. Anti Semitic keywords included Holocaust denial and things like Jewish power, which kind of helped determine the spread of anti Semitism online. This study does believe that this online hate index accurately reflects the growth of anti Semitism online. As for geopolitical events, they were implemented as dummy variables. That kind of means that they were coded as 0 if the event is not taking place and 1 if the event is taking place. And this number is going to represent major conflicts or political events involving Israel or Jewish people, using regression and analysis to determine whether these events correspond to increases in anti Semitic incidents. The specific years, which will be considered to be event years by the study, are 2018, 2021, 2023, and 2024. These years saw significantly increased media coverage and public attention to Israel and the Jewish people, as well as the geopolitical events that happened within these years, and that is why they were chosen as event years. So as for the results of the regression model, they portrayed a strong overall match between these variables. The R squared value for the regression model was 0.836. The adjusted R squared value was 0.789. And the significance F value was 0.001789. This indicates that the regression model provided a meaningful explanation of increases in anti Semitic incidents over time. Um, the first figure here shows a table containing these regression analysis values, as well as annual values for anti Semitic incidents, the online hate index, and the event year dummy variable. The second figure on this slide, this shows the average number of incidents in event years versus non-event years. And these findings showed that the event year variable was positively associated with anti-Semitic incidents and had statistical significance. The coefficient for this variable was 2500.44, and the p-value was 0.0336. This shows that years that have seen major geopolitical events involving Israel or Jewish communities, they were associated with an average increase of 2,500 anti Semitic incidents compared to years where these events did not occur. So this just kind of demonstrates the drastic difference in the number of incidents between event and non-event years. So for the online hate index, that was also found to have a positive statistically significant relationship with anti-Semitic incidents. The coefficient for this variable was 266.27 with a p-value of 0.0033. So once again, that means that for every 1 unit increase in the online hate index, there is an estimated increase of about 266 anti-Semitic incidents. So these two graphs just kind of give a good visual representation of the relationship between the two variables. Overall, though, these findings obviously show a statistically significant relationship between the variables of anti-Semitic incidents, major geopolitical events, and anti-Semitic discourse online in the United States during the time period covered by the study. However, these results should be interpreted carefully as they may indicate simply a correlation between the variables rather than a direct causal relationship. So this relationship, specifically between the online hate index and anti-Semitic incidents, is supported by ideas such as media effects theory. The relationship between the event years and anti-Semitic incidents is consistent with the ideas presented by the conflict spillover theory. Um, Factors like increased media coverage and public discussion about the Jewish people or Israel can contribute to increased numbers of anti Semitic attitudes in the United States. Some limitations on this study include the small sample size, which hinders the model's reliability. The study only covers a 10-year period, and the annual nature of the statistics don't allow for a careful examination over a longer period. The data of from Google Trends is also an estimate. It's not like a direct measure of online hate speech towards Jews. It just serves as an estimate of the increase based on the keyword searches. However, the 0 to 100 scale that the engine provides does provide a good basis for study. The findings presented by the study show that the independent variables do have a positive association with anti-Semitic incidents. The regression model provided evidence that higher numbers of anti-Semitic searches were linked to higher numbers of incidents, and also provided evidence that years containing significant geopolitical events were linked to higher numbers of anti-Semitic incidents. As for future research, that could definitely be done in a number of ways, including expanding the data to include monthly incident statistics, or include data from social media platforms that measure hate speech on the platform. Um, Expanding the model's variables could also be beneficial to include things like levels of media coverage. Overall, the relationship that this study established between these variables could be very important in preventing anti Semitic incidents and other anti Semitic activity in the country um, in the wake of recent events such as the 2026 Iran war. This study establishes the importance of addressing anti Semitism effectively, which will require a lot of attention to things like politicized online discourse and other political conditions that shape the attitudes and behavior of the nation.